Hello. Welcome to our 7th session where we'll complete the subject from the last video and begin the discussion on race in our society. Given the subject of our discussion on the rights of those in the gay and lesbian community and what has been said about legal unions and marriage, your next statement will very likely be, then you must also approve of same-sex couples being able to adopt children. Let me respond to that in this way. My heart goes out to those couples in the gay and lesbian community who care deeply about children and who want to make a loving home for a child in need of a loving, stable environment. Nevertheless, I must urge careful consideration of such a matter by all parties concerned. Not all such couples feel that way. We've all heard the story of the young teenager who falls madly in love and then decides to become pregnant in order to prove her love, when little or no thought to what the result of that decision will be for her, for the one she loves, and very importantly, for the child. If the best interests of the child are not considered carefully, then a very poor decision has been made concerning a matter of very great importance. When those in the gay and lesbian community receive the right to join in marriage or a civil or otherwise legal union, there may be some of them who may then quietly must want to insist that they must now adopt children in order to be a family, so to speak. I can understand and appreciate their feelings, just as I do the feelings of the young teenager who wants a baby. That kind of thinking, however, without very serious consideration being given to the welfare of the child who will grow up in a same-sex household, in one way is very similar to the young teenager who wants to have a baby to prove her love. The reason for the similarity is because of the fact that in both situations, the parties may very likely be thinking only of what they want, with little or no consideration for what is best for the child. I know that there are numerous examples, and I mean numerous examples, of children who have grown up happy in same-sex households. But we all know very personally, that growing up from a child through adolescence and into adulthood is difficult enough for anyone without bringing to the child any additional burdens that could very possibly come as a result of being raised in a same-sex household. Now, there are many couples, both heterosexual and homosexual couples, who have enough difficulty dealing with their own lives together without the added serious responsibility of bringing a child into the picture. And I would recommend against such a decision until the couple just described, whether heterosexual or homosexual, be better prepared. I am not going to say that same-sex couples should not be allowed to adopt children, because I know that there are a great many who would provide wonderful, loving homes. But I will say very strongly that both they and the authorities approving the adoption use great discretion, just as they would in any situation with children, where there are or where there may be concerns about whether or not the child would be better off in that particular home. It must be a matter of giving careful consideration to each individual case. This should apply whether the household has a single parent, same-sex parents, or heterosexual parents. It's a good rule to follow. When talking about a subject such as this, I know that many of you will be quick to quote to me this verse or that verse in the Bible and give me all the reasons why, in your mind and according to your understanding, homosexuals should be shunned and not given these rights that I've outlined here. Most of you will tell me that it's not scriptural to have things be as I have described here. In response, let me first say that if you truly believe that we should all be living scripturally, then I would ask you that you read Acts 4:32 through 37 and ask yourself if you're living scripturally regarding circumstances that the apostles of Jesus considered important enough to be a matter of life or death. Acts 5:1 through 10. As an additional response, let me say that to you once more, without hesitation, that which I indicated earlier, that I know those of you who are parents with children under your responsibility would never want one or more of your children, simply because they could get away with it, to punish, shun, ostracize, or in any way penalize another of your children who simply saw things differently than the other children. Can you not understand that God, being a far more perfect parent than you or any of us could ever possibly imagine being, would similarly not want his children doing that to their brothers and sisters? Do you think that those in the homosexual community are here on this earth by accident? Do you think that God makes mistakes somehow and they just didn't turn out quite right? Don't be ridiculous. Don't you understand that we're all different in our own way, and that the purpose of our differences is to allow each of us to walk our own individual path that each of us must walk during our lives here, and further, to allow each of us to have the opportunity to learn to love, respect, and accept those who are walking on a path that is different from our own. Have you ever considered the possibility that people may have been instructed regarding this subject in the way that they were instructed 2,000 or more years ago, because at that time they weren't capable of understanding the concepts that have been put forth here and elsewhere? Excuse me. Consider further that people today are more than capable of understanding these things and are now ready to accept a better way. For those of you who would tell me that God's Word and His will are constant and never change, perhaps you'll consider reading Matthew 5:27 through 28, 31 through 34, 38 and 39, and 43 and 44. God enlightens humankind with more perfect truth and knowledge when the time comes that our level of consciousness has reached the point when we're capable of understanding and appreciating such higher truth and knowledge. These are private lives, and the participants should be allowed to live them privately, so long as it involves consenting adults who are hurting no one. There are very serious considerations here that must be looked at more even-handedly, and to whatever reasonable degree our society is capable. It is my strong belief that we as a society are now capable of dealing with these considerations in just the way that has been outlined here. These changes are long overdue and are already beginning to be made in some states in this country. That is all we'll have to say on this subject for now. At this time, we will take up the often divisive subject of race in our society. First, let me state that in my observations over the years, just in case you haven't noticed that until the election of 2008, the country's political pendulum had made a wide swing from the middle to the right. Even today, there's still a concerted effort by a great many people to keep the United States and the world moving politically ever further to the right. What could have caused all this? When did it begin to happen? Let's go into some of the contributing factors that may have been, or what some of the contributing factors may have been. Part of what's happened is a result of the conservative movement continually edging over ever further to the right. The liberals and progressives want things to move to the left, and the increasing number of moderates are continually trying to stay in the middle. But that middle, because of the efforts of conservatives, is continually moving to the right also. How could we avoid moving toward the right under such circumstances as these? That's not the whole story, however. I believe that after watching all of our videos on the material world perspective of our lives here, you will ultimately agree that a great deal of change had to do with the four significant areas of difference that I've mentioned in previous sessions, as well as other important factors that we will consider later. Here, however, we'll consider the last of those four major areas of difference. Prior to the 60s, there was quite a large Democrat Party constituency in the country, and a large part of that constituency was in the southern states of our nation. During the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, however, things began to change as we all saw the beginnings of a period when the President of the United States began to openly stand up for the rights of the African American minorities, including their rights to attend integrated schools, to have decent jobs, to have a decent home, and to be able to live and to vote without fear. Excuse me. All of these were rights that most white Americans took for granted, but it was not so at that time for minorities, especially in the South. I'm not saying that Presidents Kennedy and Johnson provided those rights, because many of us feel that quite a few of these rights are still in question today. But those holding the office of president finally began to stand up and say that the time had come for positive change. These rights were supposedly available in theory to all Americans, but the reality of the matter was that they were not then available to most minorities, especially in the South. At that time, as a result of the actions of Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, the news media finally began to focus in earnest on the increasingly open manifestation by a great many whites of a deep level of hatred for the African American people. This hatred had long been present and was very deeply ingrained into the fabric of much of the South, although it was certainly not exclusive to the South. This hatred was, more often than not, a carryover from the days of slavery and the Civil War. Once that kind of hatred becomes part of a person's makeup, it can be very difficult to overcome. It tends to be passed down through families and societies from generation to generation, and for some people, far too many, even to the present day. Some of these people could give you countless reasons why they feel certain that they're right to feel the way they do, why they should still want to and be allowed to fly the Confederate flag, why the African Americans should not have the same rights as themselves, and I wouldn't be surprised, sadly, if a few of them would even tell you why they believe that African Americans should still drop their head and get off the sidewalk when a white person walks by. What a sad way of thinking, even though it's now done less openly to have still today in our America. This concludes Session 7. I thank you for watching. We'll continue this subject in Session 8. We hope you'll watch us.